The government once secretly spied on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and now Congress says it's happening again, this time to anti-ICE protesters. What you're about to hear shocked the entire room.
I ask unanimous consent for Representative Tlaib of Michigan to be waived onto the task force for today's hearing for the purpose of asking questions.
No objection.
Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize Representative Lee for 5 minutes.
Wasn't expecting that. But thank you so much, Madam Chair. I think the thing that we need to remember during this hearing is that these files wouldn't even exist if the federal government had not abused its surveillance powers and gone after private citizens like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI ruthlessly and persistently surveilled Dr. King and his family, even in their own home and without any kind of warrant. It is only thanks to the work of journalists and government investigators of the 60s and the 70s that we know that the FBI weaponized its COINTELPRO program to spy on, to harass, and to intimidate Dr. King and many other civil rights leaders and figures. In 76, the Senate Church Committee found that the FBI used COINTELPRO to go after civil rights groups who were fighting for integration and enfranchisement. Mr. Hamadanchi, the FBI didn't just surveil, collect information, did they? Can you tell us how the FBI weaponized this information against Dr. King and other civil rights leaders?
They were trying to politically smear these leaders because they were trying to discredit the civil rights movement. And so they were trying to create accusations against him that would do that. And the most important thing to note that pretty much anyone that was surveilled in a COINTELPRO was never actually charged with a crime.
Thank you. And did these types of tactics stop after the Church Committee's findings?
The Church Committee findings were, at the time, pretty groundbreaking, and the reforms that we put into place did work in the aftermath. But that was 50 years ago, and things have changed a lot like that, and those oversight structures are no longer good.
Thank you. In fact, there's even more ways that the federal government can exploit laws now to surveil private citizens. Post 9/11, of course, a number of new laws gave the government a whole slew of tools to do the same thing in the name of national security. We saw these tactics used against Black Lives Matter protesters. We saw them used against student protesters supporting a ceasefire in Gaza. Now we're seeing it used against anti-ICE protesters. The federal government is also using AI and spyware to better surveil private citizens, which is why I demanded answers from Secretary Noem on ICE's contract with a spyware company whose surveillance product has the ability to access people's cell phone data without their knowledge or their consent. The Fourth Amendment protects people in this country from unreasonable searches and seizures. Yet for decades, the federal government seems to throw that right out of the window when it's Black or it's brown people who exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech or peaceable assembly. Time and time again, these movements are portrayed as terrorists or violent, rioters, or simply anti or un-American, all to give the federal government the excuse that their unlawful actions are in the interests of national security. So the federal government can't be allowed to violate people's rights under the cover of darkness. We wouldn't even know about the federal government's actions against Dr. King or the COINTELPRO operation if it wasn't for strong oversight. So we need to continue this important oversight work, which is why today, Rep. Jonathan Jackson and I are introducing the COINTELPRO Full Disclosure Act. This bill will require the public disclosure of all COINTELPRO records and establish a review board to ensure compliance. So, Madam Chair, I invite you and, of course, the rest of our colleagues to join me in this effort. And I think in an attempt to ensure that there is no government overreach on private citizens, I would love if we could have your support for that.
I'll take a look at it. I don't have any objections.
Thank you. We will get.
What Representative Summer Lee did in this hearing wasn't just political theater. It was a warning shot. She dragged the conversation back to a dark chapter of American history that many in power would rather forget. COINTELPRO, the FBI's covert program that surveilled, smeared, and intimidated civil rights leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not because they committed crimes, but because they challenged the system. And Lee made one thing brutally clear. This isn't history repeating itself accidentally, it's history repeating itself deliberately. She walked the committee through how federal surveillance was weaponized against Black leaders, how intelligence was collected without warrants, and how none of those targeted were ever charged with crimes. Then she connected the dots to today. Black Lives Matter protesters, student activists calling for a Gaza ceasefire, anti-ICE demonstrators, different movements, same playbook. Under the banner of national security, the federal government keeps expanding its reach, now armed with AI, spyware, and data harvesting tools that can access personal cell phone information without consent. And Lee didn't just speculate. She directly challenged DHS Secretary Kristi Noem over ICE's reported contracts with surveillance tech companies. Her message was unmistakable. When dissent comes from Black and brown communities, constitutional rights suddenly become optional. This wasn't about left versus right. This was about power versus the people. And then came the mic drop moment, the introduction of the COINTELPRO Full Disclosure Act, a bill that would force the government to publicly release records of past surveillance abuses and establish a review board to prevent it from happening again. Because as Lee reminded everyone in that room, if journalists and investigators hadn't exposed COINTELPRO decades ago, we might never have known the truth. Oversight isn't radical, transparency isn't anti-American, and surveillance without accountability is a threat to democracy, no matter who's in power.